everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So I'm just going to wait a few moments to give everyone a chance to join. We have received a great amount of interest for this webinar today. So whilst we wait, perhaps you would like to put in the chat what area you are listening from today. So as more of you are joining, thank you again for joining us today. We understand it is sometimes difficult to find a spare moment in amongst the daily running of the practice. So we really do appreciate your attendance today. Hopefully you will find the topic and content interesting and helpful. So just to introduce ourselves, we are Hayley, Beth and Jane, and we are the I-Team HR advisors, whom some of you will recognise as you will have spoken to us on a regular basis. So today's webinar is all about the menopause and how you can support your team member if they're experiencing the menopause. So as you may or may not be aware, October is Menopause Awareness Month, and we feel it is such a relevant and important topic to cover. So in the past, menopause has been somewhat of a taboo subject, and we are hoping the more knowledge people have, the more at ease you will feel discussing the menopause. So the information you will learn today will potentially not just be useful within the practice work setting, but also may help you to understand further in relation to perhaps a partner, a relative, or a friend also. So a recorded version of this webinar will also be available, and a link will go out to everyone that has signed up. You will also see a Q&A tab on your screens. Please do add your questions as we go through the webinar, and we will all answer these for you throughout. Or if we don't get to answer your question, we will contact you directly with an answer after our webinar. Please can I remind you though to refrain from adding specific details that could identify individuals directly. So the session content for today's webinar will cover quite a lot of information. We will go through what the menopause and associated symptoms are. It is really good to obtain a basic understanding of what the menopause is and potentially recognise those symptoms associated with the menopause. Who can experience the menopause? So we're going to cover who might experience the menopause, and it will be my colleagues that go further in depth on this for you. We'll also cover menopause and the law, including a couple of employment tribunal case studies involving the menopause. We'll also cover how you, the employer, can support your team members going through the menopause. So Beth and Jane will equip you with some really in-depth knowledge to help you support your team members. We will also cover how you can address absences or performance concerns due to the menopause. So I'll now pass you over to my colleague Jane, who is going to explain to you what the menopause is.
Thank you, Hayley. So to start with, we're going to look at what the term menopause means. So it's the ceasing of menstruation, the period in a woman's life when menstruation ceases, as per stated in the Oxford Dictionary. There are 3 stages: perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. The perimenopause is a transitional stage before menopause where there are usually changes to the period occurrences and symptoms associated with the menopause beginning. These symptoms can last for about 4 years, and in some cases it can be longer. The menopause is a biological, natural stage of life when estrogen levels decline in an individual's life and when menstruation stops permanently, usually diagnosed 12 months following the last period. It can be experienced for several years, and it's best described as a transition rather than a one-off life event. Typically, the menopause will start around the age of 45 and go on until 55, but it can be later. The average age for the menopause in the UK is about 51 years of age, but around 1 in 100 can experience it earlier, before the age of 40, and this is known as the early menopause, where it can occur between the ages of 40 to 45. And postmenopause is the time after menopause when a woman hasn't experienced a period for over a year and no longer has periods, but can still experience symptoms of menopause. So, who can experience the menopause? So let us talk about each person in further depth. So most women will experience menopause between the ages of 45 and 55 years of a natural part of biological aging. Menopause is caused by the loss of ovarian follicular function and a decline in circulating blood estrogen levels. But it's not just women who can experience the menopause. Transgender individuals, they too can also experience the menopause. And the word trans is inclusive of all people who were assigned the incorrect gender at birth. This includes people who decide to transition using hormone therapy and corrective surgery, and those who decide to live without medical or surgical procedures. So, trans men, those who identify as male but assigned female at birth, will experience a natural menopause if their ovaries remain in place and no hormone therapy is given. They will also experience the menopause if their ovaries and uterus are surgically removed, and this may happen earlier than usual. Trans women are those who identify as female but are assigned male at birth, who undergo hormone therapy, will go through pseudomenopause, which occurs when there are fluctuations in hormone levels due to medication. They may also go through menopausal like symptoms for a limited time while their body adjusts. However, the exact time in which these symptoms persist may be different for everyone, so a flexible approach is required. And then we have non-binary people, so people who do not identify as either gender. Non-binary people may experience menopausal-like symptoms. This will depend on their assigned gender at birth and whether they go through any hormonal treatment or corrective surgery. It's important for employers to be aware of all the people who may go through the menopause and menopause symptoms and to support them all equally. So here you can see that there are many different symptoms that can be experienced of both perimenopause and menopause. These can include a range of both physical and mental health challenges, all of which can have significant impact on an individual's daily life. Employers are encouraged to be as flexible as reasonably possible when an employee is experiencing such symptoms, and some ways in which you could do this is discussed in the next few slides. As you'll see, this slide will show some of the most common symptoms that can be experienced. And these can include both physical symptoms such as migraines, hot flushes, difficulty sleeping, as well as mental health symptoms such as anxiety and low mood. Surveys show that over 50% of women suffer with these symptoms at some point in their menopause transition. A couple of the common symptoms that we hear a lot about is memory loss and hot flushes. With short-term memory loss, often described as brain fog, it can be quite a scary experience. So those who do experience this can struggle to focus properly on work and can also affect even the usual day-to-day activities, such as remembering someone's name or something simple just as locating an item that you may have had a few moments ago. Hot flushes can be quite debilitating and embarrassing as they can make you feel very self-conscious. Another side effect of the menopause is cardiovascular disease. Excuse me. This is a concern for sufferers as it is caused by the decline of estrogen levels, which with this decline will increase factors such as high blood pressure, and it can also contribute to the development of atherosclerosis. So this is the hardening and narrowing of arteries due to the accumulation of plaque, which in turn can increase the risk of heart disease, heart attacks and strokes. Another risk is also diabetes. Menopause can cause the increase in the development of type 2 diabetes, and it is therefore very important that a healthy diet is followed. Now I'm going to pass you over to Beth, who will talk about the menopause and the law.
Thanks, Jane. So, as you said, I'm going to briefly go over how the law helps to protect those who are going through the menopause. So, under the Equality Act 2010, menopause discrimination is largely covered under 4 protected characteristics. So, that's age, sex, gender reassignment, and disability discrimination. So, even though the menopause in itself is not a specific protected characteristic, should an employee or worker be put at a disadvantage or treated less favourably because of their menopause symptoms, it would be classed as discrimination if it's related to one of the 4 protected characteristics shown on the screen. So we'll now be looking at some of the case studies that do highlight the importance of this. And I'll now pass back to Hayley, who's going to go through some employment tribunal cases that demonstrate the consequences for employers, if they do discriminate against those who are going through the menopause. Oh, I
Okay.
think there's a bit of a sound issue with Hayley's microphone, so I will just continue with her slide. So we're just going to take a look at some of the tribunal cases that emphasise the importance of the protections that are afforded to those going through the menopause. So firstly, we're going to look at a case, A versus Bon Marsh of 2019. So we're going to call the claimant A in this case, as it was determined by the judge that her name be anonymous from the publications due to the medical information contained within the judgment. So claimant A submitted a claim of age and sex discrimination, and claimed that they've been subject to harassment and abuse by her manager based on her being female going through the menopause. And her manager would often make comments regarding her age and being menopause in front of other staff members as well as customers. And other members of staff who are younger than her would laugh at the manager's remarks. And the manager also refused to make any adjustments to the workplace, such as considering temperature control, when they became aware of her medical condition. So she actually suffered a breakdown, having a serious panic attack, requiring paramedics to be called. And following a period of absence, it was agreed with HR that she would return to work 4 hours a day as part of a phased return. But despite this, her line manager still wrote her down to work a full week and said that if she wanted to work part-time, she would have to use holiday, and actually told her that she was pushing her luck when she was asked to leave, and she was asked to leave the shop floor to take her medication. And as a result, she actually resigned and left the employment. So, it's really important here to understand that whilst HR tried to implement those reasonable adjustments to support claimant A, her manager, completely disregarded this. So after resigning, she suffered a substantial reduction in her mental well-being. She couldn't leave the house and suffered, ongoing issues with anxiety caused by her no longer having an income and being unable to pay her bills. So let's have a look at the outcome of what this case was. Well, the employment tribunal did find in claimant A's favour. So they held that it was constructive dismissal as she resigned because of the manager's treatment of her. So this constructive dismissal means when an employee feels forced to leave their job against their will because of the employer's conduct. So she was awarded £27,975, and £18,000 of that figure was awarded for injury to feelings due to the course of conduct over that quite substantial period. So the injury to feelings part is basically compensation awarded to discrimination, and the rest of that figure was made up of a loss of earnings. So we'll just take a look at another case study. And this is Rooney versus Leicester City Council this was actually the preliminary hearing was held in 2023. So Maria Rooney was suffering from menopause symptoms, anxiety and depression. And when she took periods of extended sickness leave from her job as a social worker for Leicester City Council in 2017 and 2018. So Miss Rooney received a formal warning from her employer over her absences, despite her disclosing the menopause symptoms she was actually suffering at the time. Miss Rooney also says that she received unfavourable treatment relating to her absences, including inappropriate comments about her menopause symptoms. And, she really felt she had no choice but to resign in October 2018. And in January 2019, she actually lodged claims with the Employment Tribunal against Leicester City Council. Now, following several preliminary hearings and an appeal, an Employment Tribunal did decide that at the preliminary hearing in February 2022, that Miss Rooney was disabled at the times covered by her claims. And it ruled that Miss Rooney's disability was by virtue of her symptoms of the menopause combined with the symptoms of stress and anxiety. Now, this case involves the first Employment Appeal Tribunal decision that menopause symptoms can amount to a disability for the purposes of the Equality Act, which definitely sets a legal precedent. And Leicester City Employment Tribunal will now hear the claims that Miss Rooney was discriminated against, harassed and victimised by her employer Leicester City Council on the grounds of disability and sex. This case really does emphasise that employers should support their employees who are affected by the menopause, and potentially may have a duty to make reasonable adjustments where menopause symptoms are significant and may be deemed a disability. And whilst the preliminary hearing made the judgment that she had a disability, we are still waiting for the full outcome of that case. But it's a really interesting case to be aware of and to look out for the final outcome in the future. We have over 400 practices who we support regularly, who are members of the iTeam service at Agilio software. We support with different topics, including menopause, as well as other HR matters, which we will go over later in the webinar. But for now, I'm just going to move on and discuss ways that the practice can support team members who are experiencing the menopause. So menopause in the past and in some cultures can definitely be a taboo subject, as already mentioned, but it's nothing to be ashamed of, and employers should definitely pride themselves on being able to understand what it is and how it affects so many people. By educating yourself and your managers about the menopause and how it affects some employees, you'll definitely be able to identify when an employee is struggling with those menopausal side effects and symptoms. And with your support, it can really make a huge difference to them and their confidence, hopefully helping them being able to open up to you about the difficulties they are experiencing. And all line managers should be familiar with those company policies and procedures on menopause, and know how to respond to employees who do come forward in a non-discriminatory and open manner. And they should always take those conversations very seriously and should never attempt to trivialize an employee's experience. And by making the menopause inclusive into your workplace policies, for example, it definitely shows that you're making it a really great place to work for an employee. It gives the message that employees shouldn't be afraid or embarrassed to talk about how they're feeling, the symptoms they're experiencing, and be able to ask for support that they might really need at that time. And you can also raise awareness in the practice, for example, by holding lunchtime awareness workshops, and even appointing a wellbeing champion who could be that first point of contact for those who are struggling. And research has shown that 1 in 4 women have actually considered leaving their work due to the menopause. And also, according to this research, it can actually cost in the region of about £30,000 to replace and retrain a new member of the team to bring them up to the same level. So definitely mitigating against this through educating your team and making it a really supportive workplace is definitely likely to improve your retention levels. And just on a side note of that, it's worth saying that we found stats that it can be as a base cost at least £9,000 to even begin defending a tribunal case, and this doesn't include any final legal fees or awards that would need to be paid should you lose that case, or you might need to hire legal assistance. So on that note, I'll just pass back to Jane, who's going to go through some more specific ways that you can help support your team members during the menopause.
Thank you, Beth. So for more specific ways that you can support your team members who may be experiencing the menopause, these areas can include communication. So team members are encouraged to inform their line manager or workplace menopause mentor that they are experiencing menopause symptoms as early as possible. This is so that they ensure that the symptoms are treated as an ongoing health matter rather than in individual instances of ill health. Early notification will also help you to determine the most appropriate course of action to support a team member's individual needs. An adjustment for one employee may not be the same that is needed for another. So it's important that you really have meaningful conversations with your employee and get to understand just exactly what it is they are experiencing. So another way to support your team member is actually considering the temperature control of the workplace. So by achieving a comfortable working temperature, you will allow allowing the flexibility with dress code where reasonably possible, but obviously still remaining compliant. You should consider any air conditioning system that have in place an air conditioning system in the building if you've not already got one set up already. And other ideas could also include providing chilled water and providing desk fans upon request. There's also the flexible working as an option. So team members should discuss each request with the practice management, who will then advise on the process of making a flexible working request under the flexible working application policy. And this can be found on iComply in the HR documents number M space 233-FWA. So depending on the circumstances, requests may be approved on a permanent or temporary basis. And you should aim to facilitate flexible working requests wherever possible. And examples of these requests could be, for example, a change in pattern of working hours, a reduction in their actual working hours, more frequent breaks, and providing extra uniforms. It is important to realise that a rejection of a request is not only permissible if the reason falls within one of the 7 reasons set out in the flexible working request policy. However, we would advise you to take a sensitive and careful approach when deciding to reject a request. If an employee were to then question the decision and then raise a claim, so for example, due to discrimination, they may raise a claim based on that, and the rejection will be, if this goes to a tribunal, the rejection will be heavily scrutinised by the tribunal in order to determine whether it was fair. Other support and information that you could offer for your team members and managers could be from external sources. So for example, and I have we'll put the links to these suggestions in the chat box so that you can sort of have a look up at these yourself in your own time. But Menopause Matters. This is a really good website that will provide information about the menopause, menopausal symptoms and treatment options. We also have Menopause in the Workplace, which is an excellent go-to for training, videos and support. And we have the Daisy Network charity, which provides support for women experiencing premature menopause or premature ovarian insufficiency. Another idea is also to sort of consider an employee assistance program for your practice. By bringing this into play, it can also provide employees with access to trained therapists and counsellors. And of course, we do recommend that you do read our menopause policy, which can be found on iComply using the code M space 233MEN. We would also encourage that when you are having these conversations with your employees, that you note down what was discussed and the actions moving forward, as this will help with formulating a plan that you will be able to follow and keep track of, including what supportive measures you have put in place. This is particularly important should there become a significant impact on future absence or performance levels. And this will be discussed further in the next slide. I'm now going to pass you back to Beth, who's going to discuss in a bit more detail about the absence, addressing absence or performance concerns. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks Jane. So as Jane mentioned, we'll now be looking at addressing those absence or performance concerns that may have come from, experiencing the menopause. So if a team member, does need to take time away from work due to going through the menopause, the normal absence reporting procedure should still be followed. You may also notice changes in performance levels while individuals are experiencing the menopause. This is definitely not surprising, due to the range of symptoms that can be at play there. And in these cases, we would definitely advise the practice be as understanding and as supportive as reasonably practical. It may be worth considering making adjustments to enable a team member who is experiencing the menopause to return to work by, for example, carrying out a risk assessment. So this should definitely consider the needs of the individual, ensuring that the workplace environment doesn't make their symptoms worse. And just by making simple changes to the environment can definitely help to alleviate the impact of the symptoms. So this risk assessment could look at issues such as temperature control, ventilation, ensuring access to cold water and uniform materials, for example. And one particularly beneficial method of support would definitely be a referral to occupational health. So, occupational health is a service whereby medical experts will assess the employee's symptoms in relation to their job role and provide recommendations on adjustments that may help to alleviate and reduce absence performance issues at work. And in some cases, your employer liability insurance may actually partner with a particular provider. And if not, there are many providers that you can find online. However, if you do decide to go ahead with a referral, you do need to make sure that you're getting the consent from the employee to do so. So get that agreement in writing. And gaining that medical evidence, or at least demonstrating that you have offered that opportunity for them, will go a long way in evidencing, the support that the practice has offered. So if informal intervention in this manner hasn't been successful in improving the performance or the absence concerns that you've seen, you may actually need to implement a formal policy, which would be the capability process. So it's definitely important that before formal action is taken, that you have a really strong audit trail of support that you can demonstrate, and this will just reduce that likelihood of a discrimination claim being successful down the line. So our capability policy can be found on iComply using the code M227D. So as we've already discussed, informal intervention is, a really important part of supporting an employee through menopause at work. In cases where informal intervention doesn't work and you feel that the level of performance or absences is becoming, unsustainable for the business, then you may need to consider approaching the situation formally. Now, the first step in the formal capability process is inviting the employee to a first formal meeting. So this meeting is really an opportunity to have a meaningful and thorough conversation about what the employee is experiencing, what adjustments have been put in place so far, and what impact they've had, as well as any further adjustments that can be implemented. And if not done so already, and we would definitely advise that before starting that formal process that you have already done this, is to gather that medical evidence in the form of an occupational health report or requesting more information from that individual's GP, again with their agreement. Now, this meeting is really to agree a way forward in terms of further support required, if any, and if reasonable. And timeframes in which the business needs to see that improvement before a second formal meeting is required. Now, these decisions should be based on advice from medical experts, as well as you and the employee agreeing on the most appropriate plan. And again, if little or no improvement is seen within this period, then you can reconvene that process by inviting the employee to a second formal meeting. Again, it's another opportunity to consider what support is currently in place, what further support can be offered, and if necessary, gaining further medical evidence. This might be appropriate if the time frame between the first and the second formal meeting was quite long. And again, you agree a way forward in terms of time frames in which there needs to be some further improvement. Now, the final capability hearing is the final step in the process and is to be convened when there's still a lack of meaningful improvement, despite extensive support offered. And it's where you decide the outcome of the process essentially, where, for example, that may be redeployment into a suitable role, or potentially the need to dismiss. But it's really, really important that as an employer, you can demonstrate that dismissal was justified, by ensuring that, for example, the person can't do their job after everything has been tried to remove those barriers, including all possible support and reasonable adjustments. That there's no other suitable roles the employer can offer as a reasonable adjustment. There's no other way that the work can be done, for example, by distributing it differently within the team. Dismissal was the only appropriate action in the circumstance, and no reasonable employer would have waited longer before making that final decision. And also support from medical evidence, such as an occupational health report or GP, to demonstrate that person isn't able to fulfill that role any longer. Now, obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but it does give you some examples of some of the types of evidence that you will need to show that dismissal was fair. And the process that I have just described is a very, very broad overview of the sort of process that you may need to follow at some point. But in order to provide that more bespoke support in, the exact step-by-step process that you'll need to follow, it will require much more information from you. And that's where we can have that conversation and come up with a plan. So moving on to what is actually considered to be a reasonable adjustment. It's been mentioned a lot in this webinar, but what does it actually mean? So in determining whether an adjustment is reasonable, an employer must consider if the adjustment will remove or reduce the disadvantage of the potential disability or the medical condition, whether the adjustment is practical to make, whether it's affordable, and whether it could harm the health and safety of others. The employers should not make assumptions about what adjustments will remove or reduce the disadvantages that may be caused by the menopause. So it's really important that you're having those open and meaningful conversations with the employee when you're making those decisions. And it's also important to note that it is the employer's responsibility to pay for those reasonable adjustments. But whilst many adjustments can be quite simple and affordable, a smaller organisation may not actually be able to afford as much as a larger organisation. And also the employer doesn't have to change the basic nature of the job. For example, if someone in a call centre asks for a job that doesn't involve taking calls, this might not be deemed reasonable if there really is no other job to give them. Now, that does actually take us to the end of the content of the webinar. It was pretty jam-packed, and I know there's a few technical issues, but hopefully you did find it quite useful. And even if you were aware of some of the key facts about what the menopause is and how you, as an employer, need to consider your approach when supporting employees, that you can, reflect back on your policies and procedures and your approach in the practice. So just a really quick question, hopefully just to get really quick feedback on whether or not you found this webinar useful today. So if you just ping an answer in the chat, and we'll see if we get any responses. Again, I know there have been some technical issues, so I do apologise. Lots of yeses coming through. Brilliant. Perfect. No, it's great to hear. Yeah, thank you for everyone that did ping up an answer. There will be an opportunity to give, more in-depth feedback after the webinar, but it's always good for us to get a sense of whether or not these webinars are useful for you in the moment. We deal with lots of queries on a day-to-day basis, some small, some lots more, a lot more complex. And these webinars are really an extension of what we offer and the knowledge and support we can give you. So at this point, I would pass over to Hayley to go over a little bit more about the service we do provide, but I'll just see if her speaker is working. Do you want to just give us a bit of a hello, Hayley, to see if it's working again? Oh, no, it's not. No, that's fine. I'll carry on. That's absolutely fine. So as you can see by this slide, there's a number of key benefits of our iTeam service. So we are essentially a team of dedicated professional HR advisors. We're all CIPD qualified and have lots of experience in supporting the dental sector with their HR needs. We currently have over 400 practices who we regularly support on a day-to-day basis. We offer specific advice and step-by-step support for a range of queries, from having those really difficult conversations through to managing capability and disciplinary processes and pretty much everything in between, including creating bespoke documentation. So again, if you could just answer quickly in the chat, how many of you find it, hard to hold, those difficult conversations with your team members? Would you like support in preparing and, how to hold those difficult conversations? Because it's really a motive thing to do in practice. For both you and the employees. So, I understand that it can be really difficult to hold those conversations. Oh, yeah, there's lots of answers have come through. Yeah, very hard. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, that's where we come in essentially. We can give you that support in holding those difficult conversations and preparing for them. So the dental specific HR platform is called iTeam, and you'll get a demo to go through that. And if you do find yourself supporting a team member who is going through the menopause, stages, that iTeam platform is a really, really good place to keep all those meeting notes and letters, track those absence levels to ensure that you can really tailor that support as required. And that, in combination with the advice that us as advisors can give you, and the documentation that we can create for you, will really ensure that you're addressing those concerns in an appropriate and risk adverse way. So I will just pass you over to Jane, for our final slide of the day, who will just wrap up the webinar for us. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. But we would like to know, are there any other topics that you would like to hear from in the future for any future webinars? If so, would you, please feel free to email the address on the slide here, or if you want to put any suggestions through in the chat, that would be great. So thank you again so much for your time today. And this now concludes our session, but we really do hope that you've enjoyed it and found the information useful. And hope to see you at our next webinar. And we do have another one coming up, and that is about the disciplinary process. And we plan to hold this on the 13th of December, but further details will be released soon. Well, thank you once again, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.